There's a specific kind of burnout that doesn't come from hating your job. It comes from loving it too much. Psychologists call it passion fatigue. That slow erosion that happens when the work you care about most starts to cost you everything else. In this interview, I sat down with Tino Chapo, nearing the end of his 28-year legacy as senior lead gang specialist at Houston's Gang Prevention and Intervention Office. For 28 years, Tino has gone directly into Houston schools and the communities where at-risk youth spend their time, meeting kids where they are to reach them, stepping in early to keep them from being recruited into gang life in the first place, and working case by case to help the ones already pulled in find a way out of that path and back towards safer, more stable futures. That work happens against a backdrop of a massive, complicated city. Houston, Texas, is the fourth largest city in the United States and is also known as the human trafficking capital of the nation, a reality that bleeds into Tino's work. The gang landscape he navigated has shifted too over the years, from tight-knit neighborhood crews to a newer wave of loosely structured cliques recruiting across immigrant communities, less driven by turf and more by simply making money. Inside that landscape, Tino has buried 14 kids that he has served. He sat with mothers who had no photos of their sons because gang life had taken over every image of them. This isn't work you can leave at the office, and for a long time, Tino didn't. In this episode, he talks candidly about the toll of that kind of devotion, the boundaries he eventually had to build to protect his family and himself, and the cost of the work along the way, including how his own paranoia shaped how he parented his kids growing up. He also opens up about the next chapter of his life, pursuing his lifelong dream of being a barber. Passion got Tino into this work. Learning its limits is what let him last in it. This is a leadership conversation for anyone who's ever been so committed to their mission that they forgot to build in a way to sustain themselves inside it.
I grew up in a rough neighborhood at the time, high crime, high gang activity in the East End area during the 90s. And all the way back to seeing the stuff with my own relatives, uncles, dad, who were involved in, delinquency. I was raised by my grandmother. Like the earliest time she remembers having me was 9 months old. I was left to live with my grandma. My parents would try and work things out. It didn't work out. Back at grandma's, they try and work things out. Wouldn't work out. And then by the time we started school, my grandma wanted me to have the best opportunity. So she just didn't give me back. So from when I started school all the way through, I stayed with my grandma. So my mom was kind of doing her own thing. And my dad was there at the house with us, but he was dealing with his own issues, alcohol use and drug use and things like that. My grandma wanted me there, and that was it. She was a big deal for me growing up. So she's the one that had me there and took care of me and made sure that I had clothes and food and things like that, the best that she could, while having to take care of her own.
Were you in a gang?
I was never in a gang. I lived in a neighborhood that was heavy Southeast Crip activity. So naturally, everybody knew somebody that was involved in this stuff. I would never tell anybody I was a hardcore gang member, but I most definitely was out there, and I was in cars that I shouldn't have been in, and I was in places that I shouldn't have been in. And it was split decisions like, hey, just take me home, or no, this is not for me. I think that I most definitely like to carry myself as a tough guy too, growing up in that area, but I never wanted to hurt anybody.
So how did you manage to keep yourself out, given that you were living in the home with a gang member?
I was really into positive things. Football was my thing, and I cut hair, so I was able to navigate through it and not be so directly involved in it. But it was most definitely in risky situations or dangerous situations, just growing up in that area and having friends that were heavily involved. And my neighborhood was very active in gangs, so I witnessed it daily. Starting in middle school, I was in 7th grade, and then by 7th grade, kids were actively participating in gang activity. So in 7th grade, I was still in the band playing football. And I remember one of the guys that I hung around with, he was the first person I knew that got killed. So the person that I was living with was involved in some stuff. My grandma was able to relocate them to another city with some of her relatives. And I kind of stayed back having to deal with the stuff, which eventually led to me having to check out of the high school where I was playing football at and, things like that. So I went to Alma. So I was getting away from that. And then being at Alma, I really started seeing the real more intense gang activity.
Tell me about Alma. Alma is what?
It was an alternative from either going to Austin or Millby were the two closest high schools to it. So if you got behind or you were having disciplinaries, you could go there. And
you really just grew up around a lot of gang activity, yet you managed to kind of stay out of it by just focusing on activities that kept you
positive
busy,
activity,
basically,
positive people in the community, because I knew I wasn't getting it at home. So there was a rec center walking distance from my house, and I spent a lot of time with the rec staff. That's where I would go and learn skills that I would not otherwise have not learned. There was always something for me. There was always something positive going on at the park. So I kind of just leaned on that, as my everyday getaway, as an alternative from the negative stuff. And even there would still be some stuff happening at the park. Every day we were scared. You can actually YouTube some of this stuff. You can look, I lived at Mason Park. If you know the park, if you were to look it up, I lived 3 houses from the park. I didn't even have to cross the street.
What's Mason Park known for?
Well, I mean, it's a beautiful park, but in the 90s, it was the spot in the city for teens to hang out. Long before these takeovers, it was the spot, just cars up and down, gang activity. It would go from 75th up Harrisburg. So it crossed into, at the time, I would say 2 major gang areas. And when it got to the other side of the railroad tracks, it was even more gang activity. There was one time I remember that a guy came by and he had a nice car and I was dribbling the basketball and I was just so mesmerized by the car and I stopped dribbling the ball and I just looked, and the guy puts the car in park and he gets out like, "Hey, what's your problem? You are, and I'm like, "Hey man, I'm just looking at your car." You know what I mean? So, and that was every day, like those little encounters like that. What, I played football. I was on the offensive line. So I was always a big kid. So some of my other friends felt safe walking next to me. You know what I mean? So,
yeah.
So I would sometimes carry the load. So that kind of made things a little bit easier for me. But, I just remember I had a group of friends that I was their, their safety because I played football. I cut hair. I had a bunch of friends all over the place. They're using me like a shield. I really think that the guys just felt safe around me.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the turning point was for you when you realized that you wanted to work with gangs.
A series of events. Wrapping up my junior year, I got pulled into the principal's office and they're like, "Hey, you can't come here next year. Your attendance is bad. I got in a fight, things like that. Like, you got to find another school to go to." And I didn't know that there was things like No Child Left Behind or there was rules that they couldn't do that. And my grandma most definitely didn't know that they couldn't do that. So I'm getting kicked out of school and the principal's telling me I can't. And his office is open and the secretary's right there. And somebody from the city of Houston comes in and have a stack of applications for the lifeguards. And I remember overhearing the person from the city give it to the secretary and say, "Make sure your kids from the swim team get this. But the city's hiring lifeguards for the summer." In middle school, I was in every single club you could think of just because I didn't like being at home. I mean, I was in football. I was in chess. I was in theater. I was in swim. Like, well, I could swim. I can do that. So on the way out, I'm getting kicked out of school anyway. So I took one of those applications. So then I ended up getting trained and certified by the city of Houston to be a lifeguard. So even my employee number goes all the way back to 95. Everybody's like, "How do you have such an old employee number?" Because the city of Houston keeps your employee number. I've been working for the city since I was young. So I went and I took the buses from the East End to the old YWCA on Wall and Allen Parkway Memorial. And that was a trek.
How old were you? How old were you at this point?
I was 17. So I'm crossing into areas, riding the bus. I became a certified lifeguard. I was pretty proud to have that certificate, in CPR, first aid, 17 years old. That was big for me. Well, the city ended up putting me at a park where I couldn't work. It was too much gang stuff, the rivals to my friends, not me. I didn't have problem, but people, when you're affiliated with that stuff, you are that too. So in the eyes of Central Park or Lenox or somebody like that.
What does affiliated mean?
It's when you're not initiated into a gang, but you're hanging out. So, you're standing where they're standing, you're sitting with them at lunch and you live where they live, so rival gang members, they see you and they don't understand the difference. So, and it was not a good place for me to be. So I couldn't work at the park.
So going back, you're a lifeguard, you've been working now with the city of Houston.
Right. I couldn't work that pool. So I'm like, I got this lifeguard certification. What am I going to do with this? So I went and I applied at the YMCA and they were even more desperate for lifeguards than the city was. So I turned in my application. I think I started the next day, and
Yeah.
it was a completely different area. I didn't have to worry about any gang stuff. So I'm lifeguarding. That summer they have an outreach program for the kids at the nearest apartment complex, Willow Creek, also known for its high gang activities. And they would bring these kids into the Y, and they would not last. They'd get into trouble, and then they'd get put out that quick. They didn't know any better. They just loud, rowdy kids. So I remember, like, I would tell them, like, look, stay away from the racquetball courts. Those people have expensive things. They don't want you around there. Play basketball, come hang out the pool, and hang out places where you're not going to get in trouble. And those kids ended up hanging out at the pool all summer. And they'd come and they'd talk to me and they'd hang out. And I talked to them about, things I had going on. And the guy that was running the program, he'd come and check on them and see how they were doing. And he kind of knew well, they're at the pool. They're with the lifeguards. They're good. They're in good hands over there. And then, and then he approached me, and I'll never forget the name of Randy Takaoka. He kind of got me introduced into the field. He goes, hey, you're pretty good with these kids. You're really good with these kids. And how about you come and take on some extra hours and help me out with the outreach side, extra 15, 20 hours a month. And well, yeah. So then I got my first taste of working with kids and hanging out and going to the rec center that the Y had set up in the apartment complex and doing activities with the kids. And I didn't know what was going on. I just wanted to help. We do a year of that. He's putting me on some soccer projects and I'm coordinating events, and I'm still going through my senior year of high school at the time. And that's
so you didn't get kicked. You got kicked out of school.
Right. I got kicked out of school. I went to Alma, and they had a gang outreach guy there at Alma too. And he's coming and he's doing presentations to all the classes about drugs and alcohol and gangs and stuff like that. And I just remember just sitting there and I was just like, look at this guy, you know what I mean? Look, everybody's listening, everybody's paying attention. And I knew I was a group of bad kids and everybody's paying attention. He's connecting with them. And I was like, man, he's good. I wonder if I could do something like this. And it was Victor Gonzalez, the famous Victor Gonzalez, National Gang Center, Victor Gonzalez, Chicano Family Center, worked at AMA, and then eventually became our director at the Mayor's Anti-Gang Office when it was still called the Mayor's Anti-Gang Office. And he was in charge of the Bodies and Needles program. And he was the one that was bringing the kids over to swim at the Y. And then Randy introduced him to me. He goes, hey, there's somebody you need to meet, Tino. So then in my mind at that time, since I was 14, the only thing on my mind was cutting hair. I was thinking about, I'm saving all my money to fund my way through barber college. And he goes, hey, man, how about you come and work with us at the AMA, at the drug program? And, I could get you some experience at the treatment center, working graveyards, late night hours. And when you have some experience, I'll bring you over to the Bodies and Needles program. I'm like, man, this is a real agency. This ain't the Y anymore. I'm being, asked to go work at a real job. And I'm 20, turning 21 now. I remember going to the barber college and going to fill out my application at AMA on the same day. I ended up getting hired by AMA. I'm at AMA working at the residential treatment center. And after 2 years of that, I get called to the actual gang program. And Victor, he calls me up and he said, hey, man, we got a position at the City of Houston. And I'm like, hey, are you working with you at the Mayor's Anti-Gang Office at City Hall? He goes, yeah, man, I think he'd be a really good fit for my team. That was 22 years ago this week. And it's been a really good adventure because I've had opportunities to go speak in Orlando. Travel the country, speaking on gangs all over the state, you know what I mean? And I've helped a lot of kids along the way. I got kids that have played college football for Texas A&M, turning on the TV and seeing one of your kids that was affiliated with Bloods in Southwest playing football. And I got kids that are engineers, law enforcement, firefighters, construction company owners, and things like that. The unfortunate part of this is in working this for 28 years, I've also buried 14 kids. And that's 14 funerals and 14 crying moms and 14 I wish I would have, did I try my best with this, and I've also worked with 6 murderers as well, but being able to focus on the positive things. And
so, Tino, I want to set some context around Houston, and because your focus is here with working with the City of Houston at the Office of Gang Prevention and Intervention. Let's talk about Houston. I mean, it's the 4th largest city when it comes to the scale and complexity of what you're dealing with.
We're all dealing with this across the nation with cutting of funds and loss of resources. So at the peak of the anti-gang office, I'm sure there was at least 20 of us between 4 or 5 different programs, maybe 25 of us. Now there's just 3 of us on the street, 4 of us in the whole team, 3 of us on the street. So we're having to become more resourceful and we're having to work with less, obviously.
Talk us through the environment, though. I mean, What is a gang activity like? Tell us a little bit about the environment that you
Well,
work with.
I primarily work in the East End area. We are trained by the National Gang Center and the comprehensive gang model. I spent my time working the East End area where I was home and working the community that I grew up in. But at some point, things got really hot in the Southwest area. So we're over there dealing with stuff with Southwest Cholos, LPs. MS-13 is probably where I saw the most amount of violence and I lost the most amount of kids working that area because it's such a dense area with gang activity. And, it has more diversity there. The high school over there, Sharpstown High School, is over 100 different languages spoken at the school. So we've seen everything from the Central American kids to kids from the Congo being affiliated with LP because it's such a dense area and so many different cultures.
What's LP?
La Primera street gang. So they'd have kids, that they were recruiting from the Congo. And now, even now, as things continue to change, we're dealing with stuff in Paul Revere Middle School where you have the Afghanistan kids fighting with the kids from Central America. And now, and then just last month, I got called to a school in Southwest where they have Afghanistan kids who are being recruited into Southwest Cholos and La Primera gang. So you still have that area that's real, you know what I mean? So much different cultures and things like that. And it's a beautiful thing, but also with that comes the gang violence, things like that. So we had to spend a lot of time out there.
How many gangs are you working with within the area of Houston?
Right now, you're always going to have the hot group. So I would say this year, for sure, at least 8 different gangs. Kids are joining these cliques with less structure, less symbols and codes and things like that. They have to remember, make money. We're dealing with a group from Hiram Clark. 3 years ago, they were into every money-making thing they can think of, from robbing, selling drugs, home invasions, auto theft, selling Frenchies, selling vapes, so robbing pet stores. The cliques now, they just want to make money.
So what you're seeing is that nowadays, the purpose of these gangs is their objective is to make money.
To make money. They don't care about territory, signs or symbols, disrespecting my clique, things like that. They still have beefs and wars, but it's not so much about the graffiti on the wall anymore or coming into our turf.
About that, Houston is known as the human trafficking capital of the nation.
Right.
How does that connect with the work that you do?
We've had some severe cases. We've come across some stuff where we thought was being run by maybe a local gang like Southwest Cholos, where we had a middle school that had 7 girls run away all at the same time. So then we had to put some attention on that. And they had a recruiter at the school and she was inviting the girls to the hangouts. We've had several cases because it's gang. So it comes into our world, where when we were offering the tattoo removal services, we had a parent coming in and she wanted tattoo removal. It turns out that the gang had tattooed their logo on the girl's hip or whatever and had marked her. And, so we started working with the girl and she said she got invited to a party and they kept her for 6 months, drugged up, alcohol, drugs, things like that. And around the clock, she was making money. And during the day, she was cleaning restaurants and bars. Late after that, they had her dancing. And then after hours, they were prostituting her. She was able to escape. And even when she escaped, they went to the parents' house and hey, she's our property. You need to hand her back over. So we had to use resources to get her into a shelter. And then we ended up sending her to Texas Challenge Academy, which was a free military school, and she was able to get her education. She graduated there and went to college. And, last we heard, this was probably 15 years ago, she was a manager at a restaurant. We have had some success in working with that population, but it's around us. And sometimes it gets tricky as far as our own safety and making sure that we're referring to the right people and monitoring, because even when we were involved in some of that stuff, some of the staff at the office had gotten threats. But it's most definitely in our world, and we have services available.
How many people are on your team?
In the gang department, there's 4 of us. But the department of neighborhood is much larger. So we do have other things, we're part of a bigger department. So we have volunteers initiatives, and we have the New Americans Initiative, and we have the Citizens with Disabilities and the sex trafficking and the person that deals with human trafficking. So even though we're not all gang, we're all working different things going on in the city.
How do you do your outreach?
I could be in the community and I could be hanging out at the rec center and I could see somebody need services. I'm going to offer them services, but we have such strong relationships with the schools that the principal, they'll identify and be like, hey, this person needs your services. And that's been really helpful are the alternative schools like Houston can, or what's the other one called, where kids that have dropped out are
So
getting
you're
back.
primarily working though with kids. Do you work with adults as well?
We get referrals for, or, we had our tattoo removal services. We do a lot of reentry. So we might get referrals for older, adults that are getting out of this stuff and they need resources as far as employment, job readiness. We wrapped up a fatherhood program in District H, which is primary, the Third Ward Sunnyside area where we had a men's group, so we had, and that was all different ages. It just wanted some help with parenting and things like that. So we do service adults as well.
What is the hardest part of your job?
I mean, obviously for me, it's losing kids. That part's always hardest, but I think not getting the support. There's not always resources, lack of resources. We do have some parts of the city that have a lot more resources than others where we're able to get families into programs and things like that. But just the lack of resources is just the biggest issue. It makes it difficult when you have people that need services.
How do you handle the emotional weight of your work?
I do focus a lot on the positive things, looking at the success that we had. But I think that the office overall has gotten better about taking care of their employees because we do have employee assistance programs, the AP. But for me, it's my hobbies. When I'm away from the office, I like to camp and fish. I spend a lot of time in nature, out there, spend time out there walking my dog. And my kids are older, so a lot of time with them, Boy Scouts with my son, or coaching softball with my daughter, so for me, it's a self-care thing. Take better care of myself. So I'm able to continue to do this. Those times when you didn't realize that you were burnt out, you were really feeling the fatigue. Now, I think that over the past few years, I've got better at recognizing that. Even our office, as we're now changing, like the office changed from anti-gang to prevention and intervention. You cannot work hardcore gang members 5 days a week. You just can't. We're implementing some positive things. We have our soccer program going on with District I right now, and it's every Tuesday and Thursday. And I mean, it's been a lot of fun. We just started this week. So I've seen all the positive kids out there that are into sports, and we're able to get them to play in the leagues. These little kids in the community that don't have a dollar to their name, but they were wearing a jersey and they were getting professional coaching from a professional soccer coach, and just to see the way their eyes lit up. And even some of the kids that were the teenagers, they were going to the park to go play pickup soccer. And next thing you know, they're playing in a league and they have a uniform on. We had music. We have coaches that were affiliated with the Dynamo and things like that. One of the things that I said that I was also involved in was playing chess. So now our new director is allowing me to bring a chess program into the department.
To think of life as a chess game.
Yeah. So,
Going through these strategies of the different
strategies, make a decision. We use some curriculums, stop, think, and act. So we could get these kids to stop, just stop real quick and think before you make these decisions. That's big. And I think that's the biggest thing, is getting them to stop and think just for a second. So I'll be in the detention centers teaching the residents how to play chess. And I've, started doing it some of the schools, with the alternative schools where they don't have those type of services, where kids go after they get kicked out of their home school. We started those. So I think being able to do more positive things is most definitely something helpful.
What's the worst story you've ever experienced?
And there's been so much trauma, in these individual cases. But just the last kid that I lost, and knowing that when the victim was still at the office, we're staffing him, he's like, he ain't gonna make it, Tino. He ain't gonna be around much longer. Just because at such a high level he was going, and he was such a likable kid. He was so fun and so funny. He was hilarious. He went to so many activities with us, fishing, Dynamo, Astros. And I remember we went fishing in Galveston. He caught a mullet, which is a trash fish, a bait fish, and he put it in a cup. He's like, I'm gonna take this home and cook it. You're not putting that fish in the van. And he said that, when he was in his country, that's what he would do. He would go in the morning, eat fish, and bring the fish back so they could cook it. You know what I mean? So in this country where he came from, and for him, that was him being useful. He was killed. Seeing the video footage of him. I've seen too many of those. I don't want to see. Somebody always has a phone out. So looking at, meeting with HPD and them showing us the video of him getting shot, and then the mom reaching out. And she was like, I don't have any pictures of my son, because he grew up in Honduras, and he just came to live with her. He'd only been here for like 3 years. He said, I have no pictures of my son. And the pictures that his friends have, he's wearing his gang colors and he has guns. So do you have any pictures of my son? And I gave her 5 or 6 pictures, of him at the dynamo, him fishing, him with the fish that he caught. And she said that she appreciated. She said the only time he did anything fun in his life was when he was with us. When I picked him up, she knew that he was going to have a good time and that he was safe. And I remember going to the funeral and looking at the obituary, and she had used all the pictures that I sent her. So, and I was like, man, this was really the only time the kid was able to be a kid.
Like in an organization, right? There's usually like you want to start at the top and change their hearts and minds. And then you kind of hope that trickles down to the people, their subordinates, and that change will occur. It sounds like y'all's work is working with the subordinates, trying to change it there. Is that intentional, or is there any benefit to starting at the top and pushing it down? Kind of like if you change the hearts and minds of the head gang leader, which could be an adult, then that'll impact.
Even when we use a comprehensive gang model, it is designed for us to reach the higher level members, or the most active, or the most potential to be violent. And then it'll trickle down. So if I'm able to slow down the guy that's pushing the stuff, it's going to trickle down. Some of my best work, I think, was when I was working La Primera gang in Southwest Houston, because at the time they were probably number 5 ranked gang in the city. And we were able to get into their main hub, which was Sharpstown Middle School. We were able to get in there right where it starts. And we were doing soccer, we were doing basketball, we were doing things. And we were able to slow down the recruitment and get services to the more active gang members. And then the ones that were not going to get the services, they were dealt with by law enforcement, that we had knocked out La Primera to almost non-existent in a team effort between us, law enforcement, and probation. And that was the goal. We were going to hit the hard hitters, and then it was going to trickle down. One of the kids that I work with, I have pictures of him in a group picture with 2 murderers and some kids that were heavily involved in LP. And he would stay after school for soccer. And he didn't say a word to me for 3 or 4 months. He was just watching. I remember he brought me a book, a Blueford High book. And he was like, and it was about gang violence. He's like, hey, you should read this, sir. He was most definitely, he's a big kid too, where he was going to be one of those kids. He was going to be an active LP, and he was going to be one of the kids that hurt people just because where he lived at and things he was involved in. And just to see him change from, I have pictures of him throwing up gang signs, wearing all white from head to toe, and to see him transform in just a little bit of time to that, then I got him in 7th grade and 8th grade. He was playing football and he was playing sports. And then he went to high school, and then he graduated from UH a couple of years ago, and seeing him, with his career taking off and traveling. And I can go back and look at that picture and say, by us getting in the middle of this group right here, and probably, at least 6 other kids that I work with in that particular group are doing amazing things. I remember dropping off my daughter at St. John. They have law enforcement and firefighters. My daughter was like, Dad, that guy's coming to talk to you. She was worried he was profiling me or something like that. And he came and he started getting closer. I'm like, wait a minute. That's one of my kids. That's one of my LPs. And he's a firefighter, and he got to the extra job working at St. John. And I remember he gave me a big old hug in front of my daughter. I remember he almost cried in front of my daughter. And he like, look, Tino, I made it. And I have a few from that particular group of LPs that are doing so wonderful. And it's like, I can look at the picture of them being recruited by LP, and then I can go back and look at their social media, and they're, traveling the world, or they're, making rank, or they're engineers now. And these kids were supposed to be LPs. They were supposed to be LPs. That was their destiny. And we got involved, and we just turned it completely around.
You've been married 26 years. Your wife is a social worker as well. What is it like when both of you come home carrying this kind of work?
we both, when she has something, we most definitely debrief a little bit about some of the things. But I think also I try not to overwhelm her like I did when I was early in my career. So I would always, always had a crazy story to tell and things like that. So I've gotten better about not always bringing that stuff home, like dealing with it over there, because it could be a lot for her too. And she has her own cases. She works for Aris Health.
How have you learned to cope with the kids that are going through this and living this, and these stories that you share about what you've seen, and how do you cope with that?
I've been doing this so long. I've been doing it, and I've been seeing it for so long. And I hate to think that, not that I'm desensitized, but I think that, like I said before, just finding my own things, my own positive things to do, because it can become overwhelming. And I think I've had my own issues along the way. of dealing with this stuff. So finding positive ways to deal with it, being active.
How did you learn to kind of compartmentalize some of the stuff you're seeing is scary? How did that impact how you were a dad at home?
There was most definitely some challenges, especially my daughter. She's my more adventurous ones. I don't think any part of the city's safe, but we're not in a high crime area or nothing like that. So it was tough being a dad for her because she would get so frustrated. And she's like, Dad, your work has you so paranoid about everything. But I see victims of sex trafficking. I've seen the way it's impacted their life. And I've seen, and I've had children who have killed other children. I'm paranoid about that stuff. So she was the one that dealt with it a little bit different, but they learned a lot. I have my son he's a little bit more paranoid. When he was younger, I remember when he was like 11, and I was like, dude, go outside and ride your skateboard. Cause he wanted, we took up skateboarding, and he's like, oh no, Dad, there might be an active shooter out there. I'm like, man, go ride your skateboard. You know what I mean? So it's two different worlds.
It's hard not to separate what you see.
Right. Yeah.
I think one of the things that was really shocking is when you talked about quinceañeras, because my daughter has been going to many quinceañeras, but that's actually a pretty hot place for human trafficking.
It is. And we've seen that in the work because it always, mom and dad, they're dropping off their kids at the quinceañera, but there's always an older kid there, 17, 18 years old. And it's like, hey, let's go get some tacos at Jack in the Box. And once the kids leave there, I remember she started going to the quinceañeras and I was not home fast enough to give her a little pep talk. So they're driving over there and I'm telling my wife, hey, tell her don't leave the quinceañera. Tell her to stay in the quinceañera. And then my wife's like, oh, you're so paranoid, this and this and that. Well, it's in a neighborhood there, in the north side. And it's, somewhere that they're not familiar with, but I recognize the area. And she's pulling up to the quinceañera, like making the U-turn at the freeway. And she called, it's like, oh my God, I just saw all of Jasmine's friends crossing under the freeway to go to the fiesta and get chips. And I told her, I said, that's why I say these things. That's why I know. I know kids who've gotten picked up at the quinceañeras. And it starts off, I've worked with a recruiter before. And he was a, real tall, good looking kid. And his job was to recruit girls to go to the parties. And it always starts off with, with these girls, when they get picked up, they start off hanging around with, they're 14 or 15 years old, and they're hanging around with 16 and 17 years old. But by the time the night's over, they're in a situation where there's men there.
I live in a neighborhood it's transitional, but is this an issue only for girls though? I mean, are you seeing it with boys?
No, we're seeing it all across.
And is it also just to like poor socioeconomic areas, or is this gang activity even prevalent just in areas where you'd be surprised?
Like when these recruiters go out there, they'll be in the Galleria. You know what I mean? When the recruiters go out there to recruit girls and follow social media and things like that. And then so much of this stuff is happening online now, where the online pimps or whatever, they'll have them with social media, where they can earn monetary through TikTok or whatever. They're using the girls online now. And then they end up on even more risky sites where they're pretty much prostituting through online. So this recruiting does not even have to be in person anymore. It's such a different thing that we're seeing now with social media. But, but the recruiters, they will go out to the malls, and then the gang activity can still happen in the Pearland Mall or Sugarland Mall or the Galleria and things like that. This stuff can happen anywhere. But also, I'm not trying to create a community of fear. That's the last thing I want to do. Just educating them. They can't grow up in a bubble.
What is your typical day like?
I'll get into the office and I'll have my calendar of who I'm going to visit that day. As long as there's no incidents, you can go through a day of just seeing your cases. And
how many cases do you get?
We are like at the low end, 50 a year to case manage. This is not your alternative activities and things like that. So at any given time, you can have, 8 to 12 cases open at one particular time. So you kind of got to map it out. Usually you work with a handful of kids real hard for a couple of months, and then they're start to reduce their services. And then you got somebody new who needs everything. They need ID. They need to get enrolled in school. Sometimes the visits where you're seeing them twice a week. Before you close them out, you're seeing them once a month. By that time, they already have a job, or they're already reducing gang activity, things like that. So case managing, we spend a lot of time in alternative schools because they're always like in a state of something's going on. So it's easier just to be there already so that you can put out fires as they pop up. When you have these alternative settings that that it's one school and it's going to have more than one gang represented in that school, or more than one clique, or just not even gang, just delinquency. You got kids who've been kicked out of different schools. So those are our hotspots.
What time do you get to work?
Around 7:30 or 8, 7:30 for the most part. So usually meet up with the guys and we'll have a little bit of downtime before everybody gets into their world, grab a coffee in the tunnels and kind of debrief the day before. And then we'll get our day going. We're doing a lot of group education. So you can have groups all across the city. So that's one of our bigger services that we're offering right now is group education. So we're reaching more kids that way. But it can be anything from dealing with somebody being a victim or a kid getting shot to a good day where I have kids graduating from high school or so days are up and down.
How do you set that time for yourself, like turn off work and this is time for myself?
It starts after work now.
What time does work end?
Usually around 6 o'clock now. I would just use one phone. Back then, anybody could reach me there, but now I'm using my work phone and my other phone.
Tino, what is it about you that makes you so good at what you do?
I have to say, like, seeing some of the stuff growing up, seeing some of the stuff growing up, going back to I was going.
But I think there's a lot of people that grow up, unfortunately, in those environments. There's something about you that allows you to bring value to the kids or the people that you serve. What is it that you feel makes you unique and able to do that?
Well, I'm like, going back to the story I was going to tell you. I remember when my dad had got jumped in a gang fight. The person he was dating at the time, she went out to go look for him. And he came home before she did. And it was me and my little sisters at the house. I wasn't 9 yet. And he came into the house and it's covered in blood. His teeth were knocked out, like 2 or 3 teeth were knocked out. And I remember cleaning him up. He said, I remember not letting my sister see him. I went into the restroom and I started cleaning his face up and taking care of him. And I just remember my sisters being little. And then when they were adults and they talk about that day, my sister's like, you weren't even 9 yet and you were taking care of us. We thought you were an adult. We thought you were an adult that day. I want to help people.
Is there like a language that you have or an energy you give when you're around these pretty tough kids where they feel they can open up to you?
I think that the biggest thing is being honest and following through.
What do you think is the secret sauce that you have been able to do this for 28 years?
Well, there's a handful of people that I've worked with throughout my career that have also been working with this population their whole career. I think it's just most definitely just a calling. You know what I mean? There's been opportunities for me to make more money. There's been opportunities for me to take on leadership roles and be at the desk doing other types of things, even with other agencies. But I think that my best work is out in the community, helping people, connecting with people. I always wanted to cut hair, but I think somewhere down the line, my higher power, my God was like, I'm going to give you all that, but I need you to do something else first. So I'm fulfilling what I was called to do. That's for sure. I love cutting hair. That's my medicine right there.
Tino, you have this fascination with hair cutting that you've had since you were a kid. What is it about being a barber that just...
I call it therapy. You know what I mean? So it's my art. I get to see the finished product. I grew up around it. And even now, I cut engineers and lawyers. And I go back to my training and working gangs, my education and motivational interviewing. And I'm cutting hair using these techniques unintentionally. And you're helping people. I remember I had an engineer get a haircut and then he just starts crying. You know what I mean? I said something and he just like, I just want to make my family proud and this and this and that. And this guy's doing pretty well for herself, but it's another way of helping people. I have a social media presence. I've cut a few Astros players. I cut a handful of pro ball players, cutting at the George R. Brown for the Thanksgiving dinner every year. Another way of giving. I'm booked up for 2 back to school fairs. I love giving back.
Style of cutting that you're just known for?
It's my fading. At my first barbershop that I worked at as a licensed professional, I went in and I looked at the app that they have and it said Dr. Tino or whatever. And I asked the owner of the shop, like, why'd you call me Dr. Tino? He goes, man, you're fading. Your techniques are so clean and precise.
You mentioned that this is kind of the end of your career, 20
right.
doing this. How did you finally decide that you were ready to leave?
I think there's still some good work to be done out there. That's for sure. But I think that it's time for me to go and do on the next things. And I think I'll always be connected somehow, some way, I guess. You just know when it's time.
If there's one word that describes how you have been able to sustain yourself over the years in your career, what would that be?
Faith, a lot of faith. I've been through what I've been through in my own childhood, and then I've been in the streets and things like that. And, I know that I'm being taken care of, that's for sure. And that people are getting better. I think that everything has come back to me in a positive way. I just think that as much as I've given, I've received. So just as much, and it's small things sometimes, and I don't understand it, but I know that I'm being taken care of for the work that I've done out there and the risks that I've taken, even time away from my family. I've got to see them grow and things like that. So I think that it's being fulfilled. It's being fulfilled. Whatever promise that I made back then to help others, the other end of it's, it's being fulfilled now.
I know you're going to be leaving this job soon.
It could be a year, it could be 2 years. So definitely making preparations now either way. I'm at a premier shop right now. I'm being recruited by one of the bigger names in men and women's hair in Houston right now. So I have to look at that platform or just doing it all on my own. So big things coming up next with that as well. And I truly believed that I had a destiny to fulfill before I was going to get blessed with my barbering. I had to fulfill that promise, that other thing. And I think my director now said, you fulfilled what you were supposed to fulfill.
What was that? What did you fulfill?
To help as many kids as I could, to help as many people like my dad and my uncles and things like that. So help as many people as I could. And I think that I've done that. So I've had a lot of success in helping individuals in my way of doing it, not the traditional way, not the therapeutic way, just my way, my raw outreach, my raw ability to get out there and work with kids.
And the next chapter, what does that?
It's going to be the same hustle, the same raw energy. It's just going to be focused on hair.
Thanks for listening. I hope today's conversation gave you a moment to pause and to consider not just how you lead, but how you're living along the way. If this episode resonated, consider sharing it with someone navigating their own version of leadership at the top. You can also continue the conversation by following on your favorite platform with the handle Lead Style Way. Until next time, live fully to lead fully.